Good morning and welcome to this week's Jump discussion. This week we're going to talk about the 90-day sprint, and we're going to give you 5 things. We'll actually have pulled together a presentation that's actually got 10 things on it. So we're going to look at 10 things that would make you successful. We're going to ask questions in between all of that to look at that. This morning there was some really good news. The International Money Fund, so the UK economy is not going into recession. Actually, it's going to grow by a huge 0.4%, and inflation has dropped below 10% for the first time in an awful long time to 8.7%, and it's forecast to drop even more, but not to the 2% that the Bank of England is hoping to get it to. But it sort of says, should we be pushing forward in recruitment? All the recruitment stats saying they should be. The job levels are 5% higher being advertised than they were this time last year. Perm is up by 4% on this time last year, and temp is up on 6% on this time last year. So really, it's should we be capitalising on it, and how do we capitalise on it? So your business plan is something that we should start to look at. 23% of UK businesses don't actually have a written plan. More than 30% of small businesses don't survive the first 3 years of operation because they don't have a plan. If large businesses had a formal written business plan, then there's a 30% chance of growth in sales and also a chance of doubling the size of their business in that period. Interesting enough, though, businesses that manage to survive for 5 years and more, 70% of them are following a strategic business plan. Another study found that companies that grow by 30% faster, sorry, I'll say that again. Another study found that companies that grow 30% faster have a plan. 80% of leaders feel that their company is good at creating strategy, but only 44% say they're good at actually implementing strategy. 61% of executives feel that they don't prepare for the strategic challenges they face, and therefore they fail. 67% are well-formed strategies fail due to poor execution. And 58% of organisations believe their performance management systems are insufficient to actually monitor their performance. Only 40% of employees feel strongly that their management really understand the organisational strategy. That came out of Accenture. And 67% of employees don't understand their role when new growth initiatives or strategies are launched. And the last 2 stats, 85% of leaders spend less than 1 hour per month on their strategy, and 50% spend no time at all. 70% of all successful businesses have an established mechanism to translate their strategy into operational terms and evaluate it on a day-to-day basis. And organisations that are able to successfully unlock their capacity to execute the new growth strategy increase their profitability by 77%. So there's a lot of stats saying that we should be really looking at our strategy and what we do. So today, as I say, we're going to talk about the 90-day plan, okay, and how that as part of a strategy works. So first question, we're going to throw it open to Heather and Dave who've joined us today. Paul's still away on holiday. Okay, we talk a lot on here about the difference between billing and actually building a business when it comes to business planning. Why is it important to understand both?
Shall I go first?
Jump in, Dave.
I think one of the words you used earlier on, Howard, was you said something like 23% don't have a written plan.
Yeah.
And I think it's the word written that's the scary thing for some people. Most businesses that we engage with have a plan or an idea. What they haven't got is it written down anywhere. So they know that they need to bill, they know that they need to sell, and they know that they need to grow. So the billing and the building is there in their heads for most part. It's that bit of taking the step to one side and saying, actually, we need to write this down. And in that, we need to have the building blocks to build what we're gonna do. And I think it's the bit about writing it down that sometimes is very scary for business owners, because they will have to do maybe a plan for the bank if they need to borrow funds to get the building up and to get the business up and running. But that's not the same as how many deals do we need to do, at what margin, and in what sector, and where do we do it, and all the things that you put into a plan. So I think most people who run businesses have an idea of what they want to do. Sometimes that idea becomes a plan, and then sometimes that becomes an actual written document which they can use to hold on to help them grow.
Heather?
Yeah, not quite sure what I add to that, Dave. Good answer. I think they're two sides of the same coin, aren't they? Billing is just one part of building. So if we focus only on billing, we're only getting a really small percentage of the whole jigsaw puzzle. As Dave says, there are so many parts of building a business that we have to take account of, and some of them are only indirectly linked to billing, but nevertheless, without them, we're not going to do the billing. So billing is almost an output of your building, and it's absolutely important to get all of them in place.
So I'm going to look at that in a slightly different methodology and slightly different viewpoint. Okay, that I think a lot of companies think they have a business plan and genuinely assume that they have a business plan, when actually what they have is a sales budget. And they put a sales budget down of how many sales they need to do, what the growth is going to be of that sales, etc. But what they not actually put together is a genuine business plan. As we talk about, Dave, we put a 3-year business strategy and then boil it back to the 90 days. We have a strategy that is, part of it is about billing, but part of it is about the building of the business. What strategy you need to put into the business, when those need to go in, and what those need to be. So to me, I think that the problem is that lots of businesses have what they believe to be a business strategy, which is just generally a budget. That's why if you start to think about the UK, we've talked about this an awful lot, that 79% have less than 10 heads, and 82% of the UK business marketplace, in the recruitment marketplace, bills less, or turns over less than £1 million. So it says that there is a lot of strategy there that would enhance the billings. The fact that they're not is the fact that they probably haven't got the right strategy in place in the first place to actually do that. So I think there's a bit to be said about whether people think they have a plan or whether they think they have a budget, and it's distinguishing between the both, I think. So if you looked at that, then in the recruitment, in the main, we measure today's performance and sort of monitor today's activities. It's all about the KPIs. Where should you take your measures from, and why?
Do you mean by that as in the day-to-day activities that you should be measuring, Howard?
I think what I mean by that is that we're good at measuring KPIs, yes. But it's more than when you start to run a business, there's more than KPIs that you should be measuring. So what are those other things that we should be measuring, and where do you get those measures from?
Well, I think the thing is, sometimes as owners, we are in danger of being driven by so many different measurements that we are focusing on actually the measurements themselves rather than the running of the business. So I went to work with one business that was measuring about 40 different things, and then their ultimate measurement was the percentage of KPIs that they hit. And there was so much information, and actually when it came down to it is, do you understand what your people are supposed to be doing? Do they understand what they're supposed to be doing? Are they happy doing it? Does what they're supposed to be doing factor in the fact that that's what the customers want? And ultimately, they were the kind of things that really drove the business. Because otherwise, in my opinion, it's a fairly simple one. You should measure what matters and not have too many measurements. Of course, things like KPIs are important, but there's so much data now, isn't there? There are so many tools and so many bits of software that can measure everything that you can get swamped by the number of things that you need to measure, when actually satisfaction, customer excellence, making sure you're doing what your purpose is. So are you hitting your purpose? Those kind of bigger things also matter if you've got the right KPIs, 5 or 6 of the right KPIs. I wouldn't have too much.
And just to look at it from a slightly different angle, KPIs and the things that you're talking about, I think in that question, Howard, are very short-term measures, those things about activity. And so I would encourage businesses to lengthen their measurements into longer strategic. So, you know, the measures I think are important come from your strategic goals, you know, from your plan. What are the big picture items that we want to be measuring, whether we're moving the business towards, or maybe they're in your 90-day plan if you're not quite ready for a 3-year plan. But, you know, it's about lengthening that measurement of goals. But also the other place I take them from are things like your values and your culture. So is there a way of measuring whether or not you are living up to your value? Of course, I'd say that, being the people fluffy girl. But you know, are you living up to the things you espouse in terms of the culture and the way it is around here and the values that you've said are important? And again, they're about longer term, more strategic measures of your progress towards longer term goals rather than day-to-day activities, because you should be focusing on what you're building, not always what you're billing.
Yeah, and I think that comment, what you're right, Dave, having too many measures, but that day-to-day measure is very, you know, disabilitating for lots of business owners because there's so much to measure, but it's what we're doing. But if we're looking to think about, you know, I always think if you start to look backwards, it's an indication of what you can start to look at going forwards. So things like, you know, what is, you know, the gross profit per head? You know, is an important measure when you think about, I want to implement a new person. How quickly does that person get up to the run rate of that gross profit is a question that you should be starting to ask yourself. You know, when we start to look to bring new people into the business, you know, how many people do you actually need in the business to actually hit the gross profit that you're looking to attain? Let's say you set a 3-year plan, but, you know, when you start to boil that back by 90 days and you start to look at your 90-day plans, how many people are in the business have got the run rate to actually help you achieve that plan? Do you need more? When do you need those more? So I think there's a view of you've got to look forward in a long term to then pull it back and have certain parts of that plan in your 90-day plan. Because we all know that, you know, people say, well, if I want to bill £1 million and I've got 10 consultants billing £100,000, but it's how quickly can you get that person up to £100,000? So do you need to have 10 people in year 1, year 2, year 3, and that affects what I'm recruiting today in my 90-day plan, what I'm putting into that 90-day plan. If we want to increase our profitability but not increase our heads, we've got to work out what's the profitability coming from our clients, you know, what's new clients, which clients should we be ditching, which clients should we be going. So I think there's an awful lot of measures that we should be looking at that's a strategic measure, not the KPI performance measure that we look at for the staff. And I think that's the difference between a strategic measure and a KPI measure, which is all about performance. And again, I think we get those mixed up quite a lot, and we tend to focus purely on the performance measure rather than actually on a business measure that helps the business to actually move forward. You know, so if you sort of know on average what your average biller is billing, then putting that into the future, you can look at how you can grow that average biller. You can look at when is a next opportunity to take the right person on so it doesn't affect cash flow too much if you're a small business, or if you're a larger business, you're looking at each individual team. And so, you know, from your point of view, Heather, you know, we talk about bringing new people into a business. Do you put them into the person that's churning and burning staff, or do you put it into the person that's, you know, cultivating and growing staff? But usually the person that's churning and burning is shouting, I can't perform my job because I haven't got the staff. But if we're explaining to them, here's the measures why you're not getting the people, that's a whole different process. Yeah. So I think we've got to start to look at, you know, your billing is all about your performance management of today. Your building is all about looking at what we're doing in the future and what we're measuring to ensure that we get there in the future. So, you know, if you want to double, let's say you want to double your profit over the year, okay, then how many people have you got in your business? What's the average billings within those people? If they did that average performance, would it double your billing? How many more people do you need in your business? But bearing in mind that most people don't turn a profit for the first 12 months, is that realistic? or should we push that target back a further 12 months? That's all gained by the data that you look at and by measuring the right things rather than finger in the air management and seeing what's going on. So
can I just add into that and go back to Heather's previous answer? Because I hear people say, I want to double my profit. And the question that needs to be asked is, and what effect does that have on your values? And what effect does that have on your culture?
Yeah.
It's okay to say, I want to double my profit, but does that mean everybody's got to work, 30% harder? And does that mean there's going to be a deterioration in culture? So you've got to have that whole view of, well, why would you want to say that? And obviously, everybody would like more profit. Of course they would. That's a business sense. But more profit today, does that mean a better long-term business? Would it be better to have a incremental profit? It depends on your business. It depends on your sector. It depends on the services you provide. More contract, more perm, a mixture
and the
of
people you've got.
But I think you've got to have the conversation about values and culture in with strategy before you come up with the measurements.
And I think you're absolutely right there, Dave. And I think that really helps. So when you sort of look at, when markets change, okay, and often we see business owners either abandon their plan and strategy and go into survival mode. So what should they be doing when the market changes? Because again, that's a measure. You can tell when the market's going down, the market's going up, because there's so many people predicting what's going on, etc. And if we remember, Neil Carberry was on our webinar back in February talking about we're not going to go into recession. The measures are saying that we're not going to go into recession and there'll be an uptick in H2. And that's exactly what the IMF have come out today with and what they're forecasting. So he was taking the forecast a little bit earlier, but mainly that. So what should we do when the market changes? Should we abandon our plan as a lot of agencies do and go into survival mode? What should we do when the market changes?
Well, I think, and this may sound like a far too simple answer, is in whatever plan you have to accept that the market will change. In my experience of running recruitment businesses and being involved in other business, we've never gone through a time where the market hasn't changed. Sometimes it's a little bit better, sometimes it's less good, sometimes it moves in a slightly different direction. The point is, if you don't position yourself in the market will position you. So if you know what you're good at, what your values are, what your culture is, and you know what you're doing, almost irrespective of the market, you can still carry on. You may have to make some adjustments, and then the question would be, well, how do you manage change in your business? As a leader, how do you deal with change and how do you cope with change? How do you articulate that to your staff and how do you communicate it? And then you carry on. It doesn't mean you abandon your complete strategy, because your strategy will have a number of different ways of getting to where you're going to. If you're a rally driver and you've got the navigator next to you and you're going from A to B and halfway along there's a tree blocking the road, your navigator doesn't say, oh, we'll just park up now and we'll wait for someone to come and move the tree. She or he then looks on the map and goes, right, we now need to go left here, right here, down this hill, across this river. You still got to get there. So your strategic direction is you still got to get to where you want to go to. It's just how you maneuver. But if you're well positioned in the market and you know what you're doing, you won't feel the change as dramatic as some companies who are less well positioned or who don't have an idea of what they're doing.
And I think there's a real argument for pausing regularly, not just when you sense a change coming, but pausing regularly and looking at the market information you've got, which you've got because you listen to webinars, you listen to things that the REC are saying and APSCO and all the other businesses. You're talking to your clients regularly. So these things, unlike, the pandemic, obviously that came out of the blue, nobody was expecting that.
Yeah.
But your general market moves, the closer you are to your clients and your candidates, the more you're regularly pausing to go, okay, what's the market telling us? What's happening? the less likely you are to be blindsided by change and make a knee-jerk response to it, because you're close to what's happening, and you've built into your planning and your measuring and your monitoring process that ability to just sit back and pause and say, what are we seeing going on? What are those adjustments that we need to make, those small adjustments we need to make in what we're doing day to day to take account of the changes that we're seeing happening, rather than being completely blindsided by a market change that we then knee-jerk react to.
So I think that goes back to that stat, doesn't it? 80% of leaders feel that they're good at crafting strategy, and 44% feel they're bad at implementing it. Not that good at implementing it. And this goes to, I think that lots of most leaders, all leaders, let's be honest, all leaders are probably very, very, very creative in what they're doing, but they're not very disciplined in actually putting that into place. And that final stat, or one of the final stats, about 85% of leadership spend less than an hour per month on strategy. Wow, then that sort of says that they're not keeping an eye on the future, that it's all about today, and they're not looking what's coming up. So therefore, how can they maneuver their business to go round the roadblock, or as Dave describes it, and move those type of things? And that's about having the discipline of saying, there's my end goal. Doesn't matter what the market's doing, I'm going to go away and achieve my end goal. I may have to change my route to get there, but that's what I'm going to do. And it's having that discipline. And I think that's the bit that I always sort of take away, is that, when the markets change, you should become more disciplined in the processes that you're doing, and you should be doing the things that make the business move forward. So your new business development, your development of your existing client base, your development of your staff. And again, we saw this in the pandemic. And how many times did we see this, in the pandemic before they brought the furlough option out? Certain large companies shed a large number of their staff, and then realized that actually certain parts of the marketplace hasn't dropped. In fact, it's got busier and busier, and they were trying to scramble and try to recruit people and couldn't recruit people because they'd taken a snapshot view of what was happening today. But yet within the first 3 or 4 weeks of the pandemic, they were saying what the market and how the market's going to recover. They were saying it's going to be a bathtub market. It's going to be a very short drop, short bottoming out, and then a very quick acceleration away. And that's exactly what happened. But because we hadn't taken a view of that, or certain companies hadn't taken a view of that, then they changed. So I think sometimes when the market strategy change, you're right, Heather, we've got to sit, review our strategy and look what's going on. But as Dave says there, I don't think the end point should ever change. I think we just change the route we get to the end point and drive that. So it's not about abandoning the strategy or going into survival mode. I think when you're being attacked, and if the market's attacking you, you should go into attack mode as well. And I think that's where you start to take market share. And I think there's an opportunity in every downturn and every upturn to take market share. And that is all about looking away from today and looking what the future may bring for you.
And that's one of the things I think that recruitment leaders have that sets them apart. So, a lot of people who run recruitment businesses were recruitment consultants, right? They ran successful desks. That's how they learned their trade. And the ones that go on to run really successful recruitment businesses are the ones who can do exactly that, Howard.
Yeah.
They're the ones that float to the top, aren't they? They're the ones that understand strategy and building, not just billing, and pause and think and keep their eye on the long-term goals and resiliently steer through the obstacles. That's what makes their businesses the ones that succeed.
So we've talked very generically about strategy and linking it back into the 90-day strategy and 90-day sort of sprints, etc. So let's put it right on its head then. Okay, so 90-day sprints, Dave. Why?
Because you need to know where you're going today and tomorrow as much as you need to know what your ultimate destination is. And sometimes it's much easier and better to break that down. And not only for you as a leader, but for your team leaders and then individual consultants at the desk. Because it's absolutely fine to have a strategy for the business and a purpose, and in fact it's absolutely necessary. But if that doesn't translate to what you want your consultants to do day to day at the desk, then it doesn't really matter. They need to know where they fit into the plan. And 90 days, I think, is a good enough time to measure different parts of the success. It may be implementing a new program, it may be launching a new service, it may be upping your CV output from 5 a day to 10 a day, or whatever measurement you choose to measure. If it's at the desk and you can see that it's having a positive effect on your customers and therefore a positive effect on your P&L, 90 days I think is a good idea, a good time span from which to measure stuff.
Yeah, I think our businesses, our recruitment businesses, are so busy. They're so busy, but it's so easy to get distracted by what's going on and what happens day to day. And for me, 90-day sprints are just something really tangible to keep you on track. You know, it's human nature to be distracted by what's going on and to be drawn into things that become priorities and to lose sight of our longer term goals. And so 90 days just feels like a really tangible, sensible, manageable tool to help us get that balance between day to day and longer term goals, and to see impact on some of the less tangible stuff that you can't impact day to day, but you can impact over 90 days.
I think that
for many companies, 90 days seems like a lifetime. Yeah. What, you want me to know what I'm going to do in 90 days? I don't know what I'm doing on Friday.
Dave, that's you. No, I think, my view, I think your comment there, human nature, Heather, is a very, very important comment, because what the human being is very, very good at doing is ordering what you sort of put a deadline to. So if you say, right, I'm going to put a deadline in a year's time, then your brain goes, I'm going to order it for a year's time. And when does your brain then start to think about it? Probably month 11. Yeah, it probably starts to think about it in a month's time, etc., etc. And if people don't believe that, I always use this sort of conversation. Think about when you're going on holiday. Right, I'm going on holiday and I've booked my holiday in December and I'm going in August. Right, I need to lose a bit of timber before I go on holiday. And then you start to lose a bit of timber on July the 29th. Better cut my leg off.
Flying on Friday. I started thinking about that on Tuesday.
Exactly. So what we're doing is, by bringing it back to 90 days, you're foreshortening what you need to be doing. And therefore people are more focused. So they're focused on today, but that 90 days doesn't seem too far away, and therefore you can actually start to really do the right things in those 90 days. And I think it's not just about them bringing the business or the management team in on that 90-day sprint. It's everybody within the business should understand their part of the 90-day sprint, what they're expected to do in the 90-day sprint in order to deliver the 90-day sprint. And I think that's where you start to get a really productive business, because it's very hard to affect today because the day's here and now, but it's very easy to affect what's happening in 90 days if you start to build and plan for that and drive that forward. And I think we've got to start to understand that, lots of people write a 3-year business strategy, then put it in a drawer and never look at it because it's 3 years away.
Yeah.
But if you write a 3-year business strategy and then break it down to a 90-day sprint and what's the most important part of the next 90 days to accomplish to keep the strategy on track, then it becomes a very good operational document. And I think that's a lot of the problem that people do when they create strategy, because it's in a 3-year document, it's 3 years away. So I'm just going to put it to one side, and then they forget about it. So I suppose the flip question to that then, Dave, is how do you split your 90-day sprint when it comes to billing and building?
Well, the only thing I would say on billing is there is some sort of implicit wording there, a solution, that this only applies to consultants. And our businesses are made up of much more than consultants. Not everybody in our business bills. And yet a lot of people in our business help the business to build. They remove the friction, they collect the cash, they're managing, they're out there doing other work. So I think we have to be careful, because whatever we do in our 90 days has to apply to all the business and all the people. And quite a few of the people don't bill. For smaller businesses, clearly you've got leaders billing, because they've got to do that to make it work. And I would have it, the way I've done it is you have to know what you're doing that day, you add that up to see what you've done that week, and then you look at it that month. And overriding all of that is the purpose of where you're going on your destination. Use the rally driver analogy again. If you're going from John O'Groats to Penzance, if you just got on the ferry to the Isle of Man, you're going the wrong way. Yeah, so you need to know just each little step along the way, which service station you're going to stop at, where you're going to get petrol, where you're going to get food. And as long as you've got that tracked, that daily and weekly measurements are absolutely fine. But I would just encourage everybody to include everybody in all of those type of assessments, because I think it's important. And I think it's important that those that are in support services are also share what those who are in the front office of the business are doing as well. So they don't just find out that we've had a good month. They know we're on track to have a really good month, and this is why.
I think that sort of comes when you start to look at billing and building. If we break it down, if you want to bill more, then you bring more people in. So you've got to have a plan to bring those people in, and that'll be part of your building plan to bring new people in. So therefore, have you got an onboarding plan? Have you got a training plan? Have you got a career plan sort of comes in? You then look at it from a HR perspective. Have you got all what you need from a HR perspective to bring the right people in? And all these things sort of build and build and build, and that's one of the main reasons why most recruitment agencies in the UK have less than 10 heads in, because they're not building that strategy or that infrastructure to help build that. And so if you start if we started a brand new business and said we start a brand new business today and look where we want to be in 3 years time, we want to have 30 heads in 3 years time, then you've got to start to build your strategies for when you start to bring these heads in, to make sure that when they come in, they're up and running really quickly. They don't put the business backwards, etc. And your comment there, Dave, about getting in the wrong direction, I also think when we go in the right direction, the quicker we go from A to B, or the straighter the road from A to B, the easier it is, because every time you make a turn, things slow down. And Heather, you said what we're good at in recruitment is that we seem to sort of take the turn and then go down a blind alley because we think it's a good idea, rather than saying, right, let's keep one wheel moving forward, let's keep it moving at a reasonable speed, and then let's work out how to get that wheel quicker, rather than, let's turn around and go in a different direction because I think this is going to be really good, because the wheel stops, momentum stops. And that's
we all love that shiny, glossy thing in the corner, don't we, that we get by. Yeah.
But there's certain things when you bring things into your business, like new tech, new methodology, new ideas, it takes time to embed them before it starts to have an effect on the bottom line. These are the things that should be part of the building situation, the strategy situation, as well as the billing to keep going on. And I think if you start to think then strategy, the execution of that strategy, do the people like it, and does it drive cash into the business? When does it drive cash? How quickly does it drive cash is the biggest question, because you've got to sort of work out, is it worth doing at the time or not? So sometimes we've got to make sure that we keep momentum going in the right direction and not getting sidetracked. And that's part of your strategy. Sometimes we need billing to really supplement the business so we can afford to build extra things, and that's what we tend to see sort of failing quite a lot. So the question then, Dave, we go back to some of that, the stat that really stood out to me today was 85% of leadership teams spend less than 1 hour per month on strategy, and 50% spend no time at all on strategy. So how often should you review your 90-day sprint to ensure accountability first and achievement second?
Well, I think it's a living, breathing document, isn't it, your 90-day sprint? And with your leadership team, you should be reviewing it certainly weekly. We did an exercise a number of years ago. We've got a lot of recruitment leaders in the room, and we broke down the percentage of time they spent on admin, on business development and customer management, as in day-to-day stuff, and on strategy. And we took a Harvard Business Review survey, and it said the best companies, the leaders with their management teams, spend 60% on business development and day-to-day customer engagement, 20% on admin, 20% on strategy. So 1 day out of 5 just on strategy. Yeah, that was Harvard Business Review analysis of 100 successful companies. When we did that in recruitment with about 32 recruitment leaders, it was 40% on BD and customer, 45% on admin, and 5% on strategy. So a 90-day sprint, which focuses you to spend a day of 5 on strategy, 3 days on the day-to-day engagement, customer management, customer experience, getting out with customers, and 1 day on admin, would feel about right. So your management of your sprint would be you're spending just 20% of your time on that.
Yeah, I think sometimes people have a tendency to want to be heroes and do it all themselves. Leaders of businesses spending 40% of the time on admin is bonkers. That's just not good use of their time, is it? It's not. For me, Howard, accountability comes from involving people in setting your action planning and creating your 90-day sprint. So sharing your strategy and having the team decide on the 90-day sprint together. So depending on the size of the business, you can decide how many people you involve in it. Right. But the further down you can push those decisions about what we do and that involvement in the planning for how we reach our goals, the more accountable people will feel for it, rather than imposing targets and goals and plans on people, but involving them and setting them. I worked with a really, really successful business, and every 6 months we took a group of senior leaders away with the CEO, and we reset the plan, and we agreed the actions together in a group to deliver on the next 6 months of strategy. So we didn't do 90 days, we did it 6 monthly, but they were constantly involved in that evolving plan. It dictated to them from the top at all, and they were utterly accountable for it because they came up with the plan.
So it's interesting, isn't it? So it goes back a little bit to last week's conversation regarding big billers versus team, which gets you further. And what you're saying there, if you involve your team more, your whole business in the functionality of delivering that 90-day plan and assign accountability across the whole business, there's more chance of you hitting that plan.
100%.
Yeah, and one thing that I wasn't here last week, one of the things that I was saying about that type of marketplace is that you can have 3 or 4 really big billers, but it doesn't mean to say that they're a good team. It doesn't mean to say they're a great team. They could all hate each other and probably do, and probably despise each other for some reason that they all want to be the best and trying to be the best. It doesn't create a great team, which has a massive effect on everybody else within the business. So it doesn't help the business truly move forward from an accountability point of view. And again, that's one of the reasons why lots of agencies in the UK aren't above 10 heads, because they're too, they pander to that type of environment. So the accountability section of pushing it across the whole team and everyone understanding where they fit into that, I think is really important. And I think that then drives achievement. If you're then spreading your, achievements to everybody, it's not the person at the top's going, look at what I've done. It's team, look at what we have delivered, look at how we have delivered that. And it was interesting listening to Eddie Howe at Newcastle talk about what he had done this year. He didn't mention himself. In fact, he was quite reluctant to mention himself as being part of the success. It was all about the team. It was all about the back office people. It was all about the management of the company, the upper management above him, etc. It wasn't about him, and it was really interesting and refreshing to hear someone turn around and say, "This is what I have done. This is what I'm doing." So I think accountability becomes, to me, the most key part, and how you then push that accountability across lots of people. So if accountability is key then, so how do you ensure the business is accountable for 90 days and the overall objectives? Because the objectives, again, is to get to where you want to be, whether it be a 3-year plan, 5-year plan, etc. So how do you ensure accountability?
Well, I know of 2 businesses, Howard, who have accountability as one of their values. So the way they do it is their leader says, "I'm accountable to you, and we're accountable to each other." So when they have conversations, day-to-day type conversations, not necessarily 90-day sprints or 3-year plans, they are very open and honest with both their feedback. Any criticism is given in a very positive way with a solution, and they are accountable to each other. So it just becomes part of the DNA. It isn't a thing that they do. it's something that they live. Now, if you don't have that in your business, that could be an idea to say, actually, this is how we're going to do that. And just live that. You live out your values as a business, if accountability is one of your values, because people like to be led. They like to know where they stand, and they like to know what they're accountable for and who they're accountable to. So I think that's how I do it. I wouldn't separate the day-to-day business operation from accountability.
I'd add to that I think the further you can push out the creation of your plans to involve people in creating them and agreeing them, the more they'll feel accountable for them.
Yes.
So a large degree of involvement in how we create the plan is really important for accountability. We all we'll put more effort into things that we came up with than things that are imposed on us or asked of us. So I think that's important. And the other thing I think that's worth mentioning here is that we line up our incentives. We're really good at rewarding people, but if we're not lining up our incentives to reward achievement of the organization's long-term goals, I've seen organizations where they're counterproductive. They're rewarding people on things that actually go against the strategic aims of the business.
See, it's interesting, isn't it, when you start to think about it in that way, that we've sort of highlighted that, most people are very, very creative, but we're not very disciplined in delivering that. And a lot of the time when I go and talk to recruitment agencies and ask them, what's their strengths, what's their weaknesses, one of their strengths is we're great coming out with ideas. One of their weaknesses, we're very poor at actually delivering those ideas. And that's, again, down to accountability of how you actually spread those ideas across the business and how you bring those in. Another one that I've come across quite a lot is a lot of people talk about we don't get a great number of ideas from the team. It's all coming from the management, and that's maybe because the management isn't listening to what the business is actually saying to them, and they're not embracing some of the ideas that the team are talking about. And I think that's the bit where you start to get accountability, where you empower your people to deliver the actions that's required to hit the business objectives and the 90-day sprint, but also you empower them to help improve that and how they improve that. And it was interesting, I used your analogy, Dave, of the rally driver. I was fortunate when I was billing, one of the clients that I was working with was McLaren. And we went down to see McLaren, not in the innovation centre, in their old centre. And they were talking about that they do all the telemetry for all the F1 cars. So they said the problem with the IT was that we have all the same telemetry so we can go to F1 so they can measure everything, but everyone wants a different user interface. So that was the problem that we were trying to sort of solve for them. But what they were saying is when F1 sort of was coming out of the 70s into the 80s, they were measuring 8 things in a race. They are now measuring, or they were 15 years ago when I was working with them, they were measuring 500 things a second. So their telemetry was absolutely spot on. So they could tell, and they put it in this terminology to us, they could tell how much the driver has sweated in a lap, so how much weight has either been lost or gained in the car. It was just incredible the amount of things that they were measuring to make the car go faster. They could measure whether a wheel had dropped a certain PSI, and therefore they could reinflate a wheel as it moved. It was just madness, the sort of things that they were measuring. But what it said was that they made everybody in the team accountable for all of those things. So you then start to think about what they do when a pit stop comes in. It's not just about changing the wheel, it's accountable for absolutely everything that's going on within that car to make that car go faster. And that's the things that we should be thinking about, is that those people on the ground that are living and breathing it, because as managers we're further away from the coalface, they'll be telling you how to do things quicker, faster, better, if they are encouraged to be accountable for making their job easier and making the business objectives come to life. So I think it's always an interesting thing when we start to talk about those 90-day plans, etc. So as a quick last question, Dave, what's the biggest thing that you see going wrong with businesses when they've implemented a business plan or they've tried to implement a 90-day strategy.
And they put it in the drawer.
Is that it?
They put it in the drawer, and they think, because recruitment often do the tick box exercises, you've got to do during the day. I've got to contact so I've got to do this, I've got to do that, got to do a 90-day sprint, got to do a business meeting, got to do a business plan, and they tick it and it goes in the drawer. So it gets done, but then it doesn't become a living, breathing thing. That's the biggest. So your point at the very beginning of the webinar, Howard, was that many places don't even have a plan. And my point is, some of those that do have a plan, when you go in and say, what's your plan? They'll go, yes. Now, which folder is that in? Or which is it? Is it on a shelf somewhere in the days when we had shelves? It's that's the biggest mistake.
Heather?
Yeah, for me, it's trying to be a hero and do everything themselves. So not pushing it, not using the skills of the people around them, not developing the people around them, and really delegating some of the stuff to other people to allow them to free up their time to focus on strategy.
So I completely agree with both those points, and I think that my addition to that point is, as you said earlier on, Heather, they try to do everything straight at day one rather than actually looking at saying what are the most important things to do here and now, etc. So I always think, for the first year, what's the 5 most important things to live your purpose and vision that you need to implement in your business? What's the 5 next things that you need to implement to your business to hit your next year's target? And what's the 5 most important things to hit your end goal and your end objective? And what I'm trying not to do is get the 5 of the same things all the way across. They should be different things all the way through, and you start to then see a very different view of what's going on. But a lot of business owners, they put the business plan in the drawer because they're looking at it going, oh my God, there's so much to do. I'll put it away and hopefully it disappears, and then we will just morph into these type of things. And then when they're not getting to where they want to be, or they find that they can't scale, they're the reasons, because they've shied away from being committed and accountable to that plan and actually sectioning it out in a reasonable time period and a time scale. You go back to Gantt charts and all these types of things that says this is things that happen in a time scale and this is what should be happening. And again, you go back to your racing driver and the F1 drivers. They know exactly what they're doing all the way through that race to get the car to the end of that race. And that's what we're not doing at recruitment. We try to do it all on lap 1 rather than wait till lap 70 or lap 40 or lap 30. That needs to happen there and then. So I think to me that's what we've said is the right, that we need to be more accountable to the plan. It shouldn't be in a drawer, and we need to be delegating everything across to everybody else. Anything that you guys want to add to that?
No, it looks like we're finished bang on time, Howard.
Yeah, occasionally we do. Occasionally. So next week we're going to do something slightly different. Next week we're going to look at international expansion, but we're going to sort of slightly change that as the market has changed from when we started to write the webinars. We're going to put international expansion, but we're also going to put internal expansion into your business as part of that webinar. So we can look at where we can get into different marketplaces and build different marketplaces, but also what can we do in our current marketplaces that we're working at to expand within that marketplace. As we said, the market is starting to turn. We're starting to see an uplift in the marketplace, and therefore now's the time to start to execute certain parts of our plan that will help take market share over the next 6 months, rather than leave it to chance or leave it to fortune that we're going from there. So ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your time today. It's been much appreciated. Heather, Dave, once again, thanks for all your input. And ladies and gents, we shall see you all next week.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Have a good week. Thank you.